All right, a bit more of an informal class slash lesson today, more akin to what I would normally put on my personal accounts, but I thought the topic really was an important thing to think about for the practices we do here at the school for cultivation, alchemy, internal arts. And it regards an email that I got recently from a well-known yoga institute in regards to the holiday Columbus Day / Indigenous Peoples Day, whatever you want to call it nowadays. And the point of the message was to convey the importance, even the vital nature of social justice issues and uh, undoing colonization and the patriarchy, the vitality of that the practice, to the practice of internal arts, internal cultivation of the spiritual path. And this brings up a good point because there is so much of this in the spiritual community at large, and particularly in the yoga community, not nearly as much in the qigong, tai chi, and alchemy, but definitely creeping in as well as those practices become more well known and start to be practiced more widely. But it's this, I'm not here to go into length about these social justice issues themselves, in and of themselves. I can do that elsewhere, and I've done that elsewhere. But here I want to talk about their relation to the practice, because that was the point of this message, that these are vital things to our practice. And they're talking about specifically acknowledging the land of the Native American tribes that dwelt in their area, in their region of the United States, and the importance of righting these social wrongs, these social injustices, the cultural problems that we have with racial inequalities. Um, I know I often see things from them regarding LGBTQ rights, things like that. Which again, that's, we can discuss that in and of itself, but the topic here being it's important to our practice to acknowledge these things. Now, in a sense, from a perspective, we could say that trauma is a big part of our practice because traumas do uh, lodge in our tissues, in our systems, emotional traumas, physical traumas. These psychological issues, they can lodge into our fascial network, creating postural problems, creating health problems, affecting organ function, nervous system function, endocrine function. So these are things that need to be addressed, things that, and a large part of the practices that we do from a health perspective is to release these fascial tension that bind our systems. And we do this through breath work, through postural work, body work, through the movements and the practices that we do. So there is definitely value to that, and we certainly should, as individuals, acknowledge and come to terms with and release the traumas that we have been through. It is also true that generational traumas can be passed down through family lines, and that is something that also needs to be worked with both on a physical level and also a spiritual, emotional level as well. So I'm not denying that at all. That is certainly an important part of the practice of cultivation, to overcome the imbalances and the traumas that we have accumulated throughout our lives, to return to a more balanced, harmonious, natural state. But the idea that so many push now, that we need to acknowledge and try to right these vast cultural wrongs against entire peoples, that becomes far more difficult to apply to our practice. Because, first off, I know it's a very unpopular view, but it's historical fact. And I know people today often don't care about objective facts. In fact, they try to say that there is no objective fact, no objective truth. This is a result of the poisoning of our society by postmodern nonsense. But the fact remains that if we're going to look at generational traumas, generational injustices, I challenge you to find a culture on the face of the earth at any time, at any place, that has not at some point been both the victim of and the victimizer of these sorts of things. Everyone throughout human history has been persecuted, made war against, enslaved, eradicated by various other ethnic groups or tribes. This is a problem as old as humanity itself. It is the monkey fighting over the hill. Two tribes of monkeys fighting over their territory. This is something that has always been. And anyone who tries to say that there was a particular level of injustice given to the people who were conquered in the Americas that was greater or more violent, more wrong, more ethically, morally wrong than what was done to anyone else on any other part of the world is simply, you're simply historically illiterate if you think that. People on every continent, from every ethnicity, have captured and enslaved and made war against each other since time immemorial. To focus on that. Now, let me stop here, should we work to make sure these things don't continue to happen, that we don't, should we work to minimize war and violence? Absolutely. But should we focus and keep dredging up these things from the past? Talking about how people were victimized and how that these certain people were victimized and certain people have wronged them. Does this have any value other than to cause attachment to the past? This is why it's important to our practice, not in the way that they say it's important to our practice. It's not important to our practice to dredge these things up and to remember these things and to try to right the wrongs that were done when none of us today were even alive. No, the path of our practice is to reach a point of non-attachment, to let go of the past, to exist in the present, to be at peace with ourselves and with our surroundings. It is not the path of the cultivator to dwell on things that happened to people we never knew in a time where we didn't exist. This is simply creating more attachments, creating more tribalism, and creating a situation where we see ourselves either as victims or as victimizers, neither of which is healthy to proper cultivation. Now, furthermore, the encouragement of identity politics, that we should acknowledge and celebrate people of different ethnicities, acknowledge and celebrate people of different sexual orientations. Why are we encouraging people to identify with things and become attached to things as cultivators, as alchemists, as practitioners of the internal way? Why are we encouraging attachments? Why are we encouraging people to glory in their natural state, I suppose, of what color their skin is, what country they were born in? And again, keep in mind, I'm talking about this from the perspective of the cultivator, from the perspective of the alchemical path. Why are we encouraging people to attach themselves to these things? Even more so, why are we encouraging people to attach themselves to sexual orientations or gender orientations? The focus, first off, the focus of our society on sexuality is pathogenic to the path. We live in a pathogenically hypersexual society. This focus on sexuality and everything militates against the settling of the qi, the cultivation of the power in the alchemical path. One cannot be a hypersexual, egocentric person and still effectively cultivate the alchemical elixir. This narcissistic focus on who I am and what I identify as and where I come from and how I want to be seen and my voice and my experience, my trauma, all of this, all of these things are stumbling blocks to the path of cultivation. Now, I'm not saying that even necessarily that any of it is wrong in and of itself to have in particular areas of life, in particular amounts. But to say, here again, the point here is to say that this stuff is vital to our path, vital to our spiritual practice, tells me that these people are very misled in their understanding of what the path is and how cultivation actually works. These are things that are stumbling blocks. Believing yourself to be a victim of another person is a stumbling block. Believing yourself to be a guilty, to be a guilt-ridden, being guilt-ridden over something that someone else who might have been related to you did is a stumbling block to the path. Focusing on your sexuality in any way and identifying it with that and flaunting that about, demanding that you be seen as anything, demanding that people perceive you, is a stumbling block to the path. True cultivation cannot take place when we are focused narcissistically on these superficial qualities of ourselves. Just like anything else, they might be there, they might exist. But the true practitioner does not flaunt. The true practitioner does not make a spectacle of themselves or demand that they be acknowledged or recognized. The true practitioner follows the Tao and simply is. They need no other acknowledgement, no other justification, no other praise, no other restitution, but simply to be, to walk the path, to be at peace and fully content in oneself. So this idea that we need to acknowledge the sins of the past and make them right, no, we need to just say, yeah, that was a bad idea in some certain situations. Yeah, maybe that shouldn't have happened. Let's not do that again, and let's forget it and move on. But particularly in this instance, we can't even really say that much because none of us would be here. We wouldn't have anything that we have in society today if Columbus had not set in motion the conquest of the Americas. The world will be completely fundamentally different. It would be unrecognizable. So it's rather hypocritical to enjoy the things that we have in modern society while at the same time saying that should never have happened. The Tao moves as it will. There is yin and there is yang. There is dark and there is light. All things flow as they should. We cannot be so arrogant, self-righteous as to say that we know how things ought to have happened. That we know what was right and what was wrong in this place at this time. The Tao flows, all things in accordance with God's will. So, just a little thing to think about in regards to Columbus Day, or Indigenous Peoples Day, or whatever you want to call it. Important considerations to be made. And in regards to our path in the social justice movement that tries to creep into the path, we must remember that it has no place here. The path is beyond such superficial cultural nonsense. The path is deeper. The path is truer. The path is eternal. So with that said, think on that. You can like and subscribe, or ramble about how much you hate what I just said in the comments. I welcome it all. I'll talk to you soon.